love with a married man was so tacky, she fumed, hazel eyes glowing green as her temper got the better of her. She ought to have known, but how could she have done? They had met initially as guests on a local radio chat show. He had been working in television then, she for a local newspaper. They had had so much in common that when he suggested dinner and a drink after the show, she had not even thought about refusing. Caution had never been one of her strong points, and by the time she had discovered he was married, she was almost in too deep. It had been a friend who told her, a very concerned and apprehensive girlfriend who had known her for years and who had guessed that she couldn't know what apparently everyone else did, namely, that David was married. Susannah had taxed him with it, and, rather shamefacedly, he had admitted that he had deceived her, pleading that it had only been by omission. At first he'd pleaded he had not thought it important to tell her that he was married, and then, by the time that it was, well, he had been too scared of losing her to admit the truth. Torn between the strength of her feelings, her own impulsiveness, and the old-fashioned moral strictures she had grown up with, she hadn't known whether to thank or curse Aunt Emily. Orphaned in the first months of her life, when a freak storm had overturned her father's small boat, killing both her parents, she had been brought up by her only living relative. Being brought up by an elderly spinster, who was more properly her dead father's aunt and not her own, did not equip one for life in the 80s, she had reflected miserably at the time. Another girl would have pushed aside her moral scruples and taken what life offered. But Susannah wasn't like that. David was committed to someone else, and so, heartbreaking though it had been at the time, she had announced to Aunt Emily that it was time she spread her wings and had started looking for a new job in London. She had been lucky, thus confirming the old adage about those unlucky in love, or so she had told herself at the time. In 8 months, she had come a long way from the miserable 23-year-old who had left Leicestershire feeling that nothing in life was worthwhile. Richard, her boss, had practically adopted her. He had a keen eye for up-and-coming young reporters, whom he took a pride in nurturing and encouraging. She was lucky to have found a job working under him, so she had learned on the newspaper grapevine, and she was forced to concede that it was right. She was just beginning to get back her self-confidence, just beginning to feel that life, after all, might be worth living, albeit a different sort of life from the one she had envisaged that she and David would share, when David himself had shown up in London. How he had inveigled her address out of Aunt Emily, Susannah didn't know. He had arrived late one cool summer night, when it hadn't stopped raining all day. She had been feeling tired but exultant. A piece she had done from an interview with a girl who had accidentally got caught up in a siege situation had been highly praised by Richard, and, as if to confirm that she was at last finding her feet in the fast-paced world of the city, 2 of Susannah's female colleagues had insisted on her joining them for lunch. They were older than she was, and far more experienced and sophisticated, and it had been a heady experience to have them including her in their conversation as an equal. She was, they had informed her, marked out as a woman who would go far. "We owe it to our sex to help and encourage one another. It's time we found a way of beating the old school-tie male system." Susannah had come away from the lunch feeling both elated and drained at the same time, her mind made up. From now on, she was going to concentrate on her career. From now on, no more men for her, married or unmarried. To open her front door and find David standing there, and, what was worse, to feel her heart lurch in the old familiar way, had been dauntingly depressing. He had insisted on coming in. He had left Louise, he had told her. Their marriage was over, and he was now free to start a new life with her. She had been tempted. It was no good pretending that she hadn't. David had wanted to spend the night with her, and she had almost given way. Only the uncomfortable memory of how Aunt Emily would look at her if she knew what Susannah was doing had stopped her. It was ridiculous in this day and age to have such Victorian scruples, but she couldn't help it. Aunt Emily had done her work too well. As a teenager, Susannah had believed that once she met the man she loved, all her moral doubts about the rights and wrongs of premarital sex would simply fade away. But it wasn't.